Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of NGBE Live. In this episode, we have Jennifer, Wadella, and some Vloeberghs who will teach us everything we need to know to get started with Scully and create wickedly fast static Angular websites. Welcome, Jennifer and Sam. But before we dive in, let's meet our panelists for today. We have Bonnie Brennan, we have Maarten Thibault, and Yannick Houbrix. Welcome, Bonnie, Maarten, and Yannick.
It's good to be here.
All right. Yeah, good to have you. Welcome, Bonnie. And welcome, Maarten and Yannick as well. All right. So our first guest, Jennifer Wadella, has been writing code since before she realized it was actually a credible career path. She currently works as the director of Angular development at Bitovi, is an Angular GDE, and loves building performant applications. She loves speaking at technical conferences and brewing kombucha. How cool is that? Jennifer is an active member of the Kansas City tech community and the founder of the Kansas City Women in Technology, an organization aimed at growing the number of women in technology in Kansas City. That's super awesome. She is the PubConf Sydney 2018 champion, a Silicon Prairie Champion Award nominee, Rising Trendsetter STEMI Award winner, and is apparently Missouri's coolest woman according to Pure Wow. All right, that's super cool. We also believe you're Missouri's coolest woman for being here, Jennifer. In today's talk, Jennifer will teach us about JAMstack concepts and how to get started with Scully. Jennifer has agreed to taking questions after her talk, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to submit them in the chat on the YouTube page, and we'll make sure to pick them up from there and ask them to Jennifer. If you like what you hear, please also make sure to leave some claps in that chat while you're there as well. One small disclaimer, Jennifer warned us that her connection may not be ideal and may be a bit flaky, so let's be forgiving about that. As you know, this show is completely live, so if something goes wrong, we'll make the best of it together. Obstacles only make us stronger. With that, please give it up for Jennifer Wadella.
Thanks so much for having me. We need a real applause track in here. That would really make it sound like a real life conference again. I know we're all missing those pretty badly, but I'm excited to be here with you all today and talking about Scully. So quick check, screen coming through okay?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. Cool. So internet connection story. I'm in Aruba right now because of international travel bans causing problems with my personal life. But if I was home in Missouri, they're actually rolling blackouts because of snowstorms and because our power grid across the Midwest of the United States literally can't keep up. So honestly, I'm probably on the more stable internet connection right now of all possible scenarios in my life. So yeah, we'll just have to see how things go. And then if we lose connection or anything like that, happy to circle back or answer things in the chat. But getting started, want to be talking about making Angular apps more performant with Scully. If you are not familiar or you don't understand where Scully comes from, I would definitely encourage you to check out Netflix on any of your internet entertainment providers. Definitely one of those quality shows that came out of my childhood. That is how old I am. But fun to know where the name comes from there. I want to start off this talk by kind of talking about the state of the internet. And I really love this quote by Alexis Ohanian. If you don't know who he is, he's the co-founder of Reddit and the author of a book called Without Their Permission, which is actually one of my favorite books. I feel like it's really inspirational for all of us in the web space, as well as humanity in a whole. So if you ever are getting down from being in quarantine or dealing with this pandemic, I would really encourage you to pick up this book and give it a read, because I feel like it's just a great outlook on humanity and all things provided by the internet. But he has this quote: "When all links are created equal, your ideas can simply win because people like them. The future of innovation will be made, not managed." And a big premise of this book is the internet makes all things possible. And so literally all we are competing against with each other is how good our ideas are and how easily we are able to get our ideas to other people. And I feel like this really plays into the web products that we create, because you could be the best developer in the world, you could have the best idea in the world, but if you're not getting it out onto the internet in a way that people can discover your idea and discover how truly amazing it is, you're doing a lot of work for nothing. And so that kind of brings us into this idea of modern web development. First of all, we have an idea. We create some code around it. That's awesome. The next thing we need to do for that idea to be successful is to help people actually find our idea. Courtesy of Google, we have a way for people to find our ideas. And the common term for this is SEO, or search engine optimization, a way you get people to your site based on different things that you're doing. And then finally, making people love your idea. And this ties into performance. So obviously, if you have a great application, but the performance isn't fantastic once people are there, people are not as likely to love your idea simply because it's not as useful. So this brings us into JAMstack, and this we can achieve these different things, these different goals, making sure that we're getting our great ideas out to the web through JAMstack. And so this stands for JavaScript, which is our application functionality. This is our Angular piece of our idea that we've created. APIs, which are server-side interactions, how we're interacting with data, whether that's passing data from a user or delivering data for that user to consume, and markup. And this is the trick here, the statically served HTML files. So JAMstack's approach is to use all these things, but when it comes to actually delivering that content to our end user, they're going to be just statically served HTML files that we then populate with whatever JavaScript functionality necessary that we're used to from a single page application development standpoint. So when we talk about the term JAMstack, which you'll see a lot in the Scully world, that's what JAMstack means. So our JAMstack goals, I should say, as a whole, are to provide better application performance. Part of this is that initial performance, that initial page load. Once something is delivered and in front of a user, can they see it perform quickly? Easier scaling, making sure that the way we're rolling out our applications can be easily scaled to the masses across different CDNs, all sorts of things there. Making sure that we're improving a developer experience by building tools that developers can easily use and implement that aren't going to detract from their application workflow. Making sure, or trying to, wherever we can, provide heightened security. And so these are kind of the basic JAMstack philosophies, I would say. So if you're new to this space, you're not really understanding what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to accomplish with Scully, this is what JAMstack this concept set out in mind to create. So when we bring this back, looking at it through an Angular lens, what does success look like for us? We want to make sure that we have improved searchability of our competitors. So this is a big part of performance and making sure that we're able to deliver files faster to the browser to boost our performance results. We want to make sure that we're delighting our users with really great performance of our application when it's running. And this is going to make our businesses basically be able to benefit immediately. I like to talk about this in business concerns because when you're a developer at a company, you may be in the position where they don't really care about performance, but they do care about dollars. And so if you think Scully could be a good tool set that your company could use to improve performance of your application, I want you to be thinking about it in business terms and say, okay, if we were to take the time to invest in this tool and implement this, we are going to benefit because users will be able to more quickly reach our application, will be having improved search rankings, and this leads to an increase in revenue because people can access our product better. So where Scully fits into the puzzle is Scully is a JAMstack toolchain for Angular developers. So Gatsby, I really feel like, helped put JAMstack on the map. It's a React-based approach to JAMstack. And so if you've ever dealt with that, you know how they've solved so many problems for you for delivering more performant web pages where you're not really having to do a lot there. And so Scully is the Angular-driven approach to JAMstack. I have a demo app, and we're going to be kind of talking through some of this code that I have set up for you all. So if you would like to follow along, the top link is where the web app is hosted live. And then I do have a GitHub repo that is available here. I've got a main branch that's going to have kind of like the base app code. And then there's a Scully branch that's containing all the different things that we're going to do. So you can, tuck that away in your back pocket if you want to refer back to this when you decide to go on your own Scully adventure. So what we're going to be doing for the purpose of this talk we're going to work on, first of all, improving performance by pre-rendering all our application pages. So what we want to do is we want to be serving static HTML pages with all our content basically there and ready to go, and we can hydrate our Angular application in the background so a user has that first initial boost and understanding of what's going on. We'll talk through some of the metrics that search engines look at and how doing this gets you higher on that ranking. We're going to talk about continuing to improve SEO by adding custom metadata tags to our pages. This may or may not be something you're aware of that Angular already makes possible for us. So we're going to kind of look at how we utilize that and what that actually does. And then performance by caching API calls that we know are necessary for the application, but may not necessarily contain data that changes very often. So what are some strategies around caching that we can use? So let's talk about goal number one, which is pre-rendering our application pages. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to show you this little sample application that I have. So it's this silly field guide. I don't know about you all, but with the start of the pandemic last year, I got really into Animal Crossing New Horizons. And so I decided it would be fun to build this field guide. There's actually somebody who's created a third-party API that I'm using. So if you're ever curious or want to do your own Animal Crossing development, there actually is an API. And so that is what I'm using to populate the data in this app. So pretty basic read app where I've got a villagers page. This is going to list all 391 villagers, I think there are in Animal Crossing. So you can kind of see who they are, what their species is, and then if you want to click through to a specific villager and get more information about them, you can see that on the page. So fairly common app structure that we're used to dealing with, where we've got a route and then we've got an ID or a parameter where we're using that information to make a request to get more specific information about something. We're really going to be just looking at the villagers part of this application, but the fish, the insects, and the fossils are all operating in the exact same way. If you're digging through this app or kind of playing around with things, and these are the list prices for these different fish. So if you're ever wondering about that, trying to populate with fun information. So that's kind of the context of the app I'm going to be talking about and what we're going to be doing. So high level goals with this, let's say this was a real world scenario where we're providing a service to a user. And we know that that user would navigate to our website by maybe searching for one of these Animal Crossing villagers, maybe by their name or something like that. Our goal would be to have our pages for information about this Animal Crossing villager rank higher. Get ranked higher by Google, so it'll be higher up in search results. And a big part that plays into that is, SEO, how good our keywords and titles and tags are. But another big part of that is our application performance. How quickly will our page actually be served for the crawler to look at? So just a little more context there. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and start using Scully. And so this is as simple as doing an ng add Scully io/init. There are schematics already populated. And so the great thing is this is going to take care of your, npm install where you're actually getting the package. But this is then going to make some modifications to your root app module. It's going to go ahead and it's going to import the Scully lib module for you and handle all of that. So really glad to see, a project taking care of Angular schematics and just saving us that many more keystrokes. So after that install, what we need to do is we need to kind of take a look at the current status of our app. The way Scully works is it's going to look for our router. It's going to look for all the different routes that are used by our application and use that to figure out what pages that they need to go through and pre-render to create, so then we can serve those preset pages from a CDN. So I know that I've talked to people before who've started using Scully and they kind of walked into it and they're like, oh, well, it's just not working. Well, they didn't have a router defined. And so there was nothing for Scully to do because it didn't know what pages it was going to render. So just conceptually have that understanding. In the case of my application, my routes are going to look something like this, where, like I showed you in the application UI, I'm going to have a path of villagers. It's going to render a component that's just going to be a list of all my villagers. And then I'm going to have another path that's going to be villagers and then take a param of ID. And then it's going to use that ID to make a request to get the villager from the API. And then it's going to load that in my villager component. So, this is a fairly standard pattern that we see in Angular development, where I've got a component and here I am just getting those params from the pipe. I'm making my requests to my service that I've set up that's going to be making that HTTP call and then making that call based on the ID. So looks a little bit like that. All right, so what we need to do next is we need to run the build command of our application, because what Scully is going to do is it's going to, when we run it, it's going to look in our build folder. It's going to figure out what our routes are for the application. And then it's going to boot up Puppeteer. And then it's going to basically start hitting all these different routes, scraping the page, and then dumping them somewhere for us. So I feel like this is just on a conceptual level, you need to know the order of operations of which Scully is doing things. So that way, if you're ever troubleshooting or trying to figure out what's going on, you're aware of that. So a common scenario that somebody might run into is, okay, they run ng-build and they run Scully and nothing happens. Well, you need to be aware that Scully by default is going to look into the dist folder where, Angular is preset to configure your files. If you have a custom setup where you're not compiling into the dist directory, you're going to need to modify Scully accordingly. So that's how that hookup works. So once we have built, that means we're going to have all our files available in our dist directory here inside of likely our app name, unless you have some sort of custom config. That's what Scully is going to boot up in Puppeteer and start calling through. So when we run npm run Scully, it's going to do a series of things. It's going to start up Puppeteer, looking at all those different pages. It's going to be assessing our routes to try and figure out what's going on. And then it's going to start generating our static pages. I'm not going to run this for you live because my application has at least 391 routes that would render, and that does take a chunk of time. So I'm going to show you the output is going to look something like this the first time you run it, where it's going to give you this file it's creating called scully-routes.json that is literally going to list out all the different routes it has found. And so when I run this command initially, this is without me having done any custom configuration. So this is just Scully out of the box, what it's running against based on the default config. So you'll notice some output in my my console here, and it's going to say, okay, no configuration for route villager/ID. So this means when Scully has gone in, it's looked at my routes and said, hey, okay, I see that there's a param here, but I don't know how to render this page because I know that it's dynamic and dependent on that. So that's kind of what this output means. And it's going to say that for anything that you haven't defined. And then for all the pages that it is able to create, it's going to go ahead and put those into the dist directory under a static folder. So if we want to then serve what Scully has created, we can run npm run Scully serve. And this is going to do something pretty cool in my opinion. It's going to create two different servers. The first one is the normal Angular build. So whatever your Angular build looks like, especially if you've run against the prod flag for minified code, it will be served at 1864. Your static Scully build, so the static files that Puppeteer has scanned and Scully has packaged up and created, are going to be served at 1668. So you can literally sit here and compare these two side by side and continue to figure out what you need to do to improve your performance and tweak from your static site serving. So let's cycle back to the route configuration and kind of look at what's going on there. So we need to figure out a way to tell Scully, hey, all right, we know we want to render a page for every one of our 391 villagers. How are we going to do that? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of the Scully plugin system. So Scully has a lot of default plugins built in. I think they've actually added an immense amount since I last gave this talk. But these are going to be ways to allow you to provide specific instructions or configurations. There are three different types of plugins that we deal with. We've got a router plugin, a render type of plugin, and a file handler type of plugin. And just, again, a whole bunch of utility plugins. So for the purpose of what we're going to do to render out these different villager pages, we're going to start, and our default config is going to look a little something like this, where we're pointing to our project root. We've got our project name, our output directory, wherever we're going to be compiling these static files to, and then we've got this routes object that is going to start to take the different routes that we want to provide instructions for. So a route config interface looks something like this. I found it really helpful to just always have the Scully repo clone in my local machine, so I can quickly look at interfaces in case sometimes docs get out of sync or anything like that, to have a good understanding and be able to quickly assess what exactly is expected and what I need to do for when I'm creating a custom plugin. So for my plugin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the already provided JSON plugin, which is made available. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take an endpoint, essentially. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a call to that endpoint, and then it is going to return, in this case, an array. So what I care about is if I've got this massive array of villagers and each one of them has an ID, I want to fetch all the IDs, and then those are going to get passed to Scully so it can say, oh, okay, render villager/1, villager/2, villager/3. And so as that's booting up in the application, then as those pages are built, Scully is able to see, okay, this is what this information should look like. Let's scrape that. Let's slap it in a folder and we'll be good to go. So these are the two required pieces. The property is whatever you want to iterate on. This API is a little weird where they have everything in objects instead of just returning an array. And so there is a results handler that will take whatever the response of this is and allow you to manipulate this. So in this case, I wanted to basically just pull the values out. So this is provided to you by Scully out of the box as a way to do this dynamic routing. So what that's going to look like is after I've implemented that in my application, if we look at our dist directory as far as what Scully is compiling, I'm going to have this villagers folder. And then for every ID that was found at that endpoint, it's going to go ahead and it's going to render that villager / that ID name. And then in here, it's going to drop that in a folder. And it's got an index.html file that is going to be scraped and contain all the content that would have been displaying there. So a little bit of what's going on under the hood. There are, again, a ton of community plugins, and these are getting updated all the time. So I'd encourage you to get really familiar with the Scully website and kind of checking and seeing what's available, because the community has been really, really great about creating plugins and tools for developers. All right, so now that we've statically rendered all our pages, let's move on to goal number 2. And this is to add custom metadata to our application pages. And this is data that search engines are going to be crawling for that help us, explain things that are going on. And this is something that I feel like we've stepped away from a little bit in our development thought process with single page applications. So the cool thing is to make our pages really searchable and have good content. This is something that's already made available to us through Angular. We have 2 different services. We've got a meta service and we've got a title service. And so what we can do is we can import those services, and then every time that we are loading a new villager route, we can call different methods. So the title service has a set title, which is going to allow us to set the title of the page based on whatever our villager is. So I can handle this fairly dynamically in my villager component. And then we have a meta tag service that will allow us to update our tags. And so for all the different tags we care about, for instance, keywords or title or description or image, we can go ahead and populate dynamic information here. So if I want to set keywords, I can specify this is Animal Crossing's New Horizon and then whatever my villager name is. Really powerful dynamic tooling that we have out of the box from Angular that can help us make our Angular applications appear better for search engines. All right. One of the resources that I tend to use a lot, there's this cool website called metatags.io. And so if you're new to this kind of concept and want to see actually what your content looks like, you can go to this website, plug in your URL, and make sure everything is rendering and looking good. All right, so that brings us to goal number 3, and this is a cool one, and this is caching API calls. So like I mentioned before, I'm using this Animal Crossing API, and unless there's some sort of radical update, a lot of this information is going to be fairly static and not change super often. So this is absolutely something that I could basically cache these results and then have those kind of like preloaded as the user hits them, so I'm not waiting on that API request every time. You can already do this in Angular. There's something called transfer state. However, in my opinion, it's a little convoluted. There's a lot to write here, and you have to do a lot of the management yourself. So one of the cool things Scully offers us is their own version of transfer state. So if I have a villager service that looks like this, very common where I am returning an HTTP request to whatever my endpoint is. What I want to do is I want to know if this request has been made before. I want to store that data somewhere. I want to serve it to the browser and have it available for the user more quickly than it might take to actually hit this endpoint. So we have a transfer state service provided by Scully, which actually wraps Angular's transfer state service and really minifies the amount of code that you have to get this up and running. So you can just call this Scully transfer state method. It takes a key, which is where that's going to be stored, and then a value, which in most cases is going to be the response of an HTTP request, for instance, in this scenario. But a whole lot of different ways that you can use this. So what this is going to do is it's going to, when Puppeteer is doing that scraping, it's going to see this, it's going to make the request, and then it is going to store that in a data.json file. So here we'll populate all this information, and so that way we can pass it directly to our page, and Scully is smart enough to switch between this and do that for us, so we don't have to wait on this request to execute to show user content. So another really super cool thing provided by Scully. So if we were to run a lighthouse analysis over like just a villager page from our Angular dist served version versus our Scully static version, this is just a quick screenshot. And you'll notice some of these metrics have changed a little bit. So it's important to know and understand what these different metrics are and how they factor into search engine optimization scoring. These are going to have different weights and different importances. And this is something that is constantly being reevaluated by Google. And so it's not like, okay, largest contentful paint, they're saying weighs 25% now of search engine results and where they're going to populate you. But that's not going to be necessarily forever. These are changing fairly often. And so getting familiar with understanding these different metrics that you're trying to hit, understanding how they play in the bigger ecosystem of wanting to outperform your competitors matters. So when we are looking at improving performance of our Angular applications, we need to understand what metrics that we want to kind of try and adjust. So the cool thing that Scully is going to do for us is it's really going to boost our first contentful paint because it's serving a static page that we've basically built out already and that we're going to hydrate in the background. Like there's going to be something immediately visible for a user and also for web crawlers. So big performance there. We're getting a decent speed index one that time. And so that's another one of our big weighing ones. So on the older version, I'm at 160 milliseconds. With the Scully rendered version, I'm at 120. So good ones there. The other one we want to be concerned about is largest contentful paint. And so that means your biggest area that needs to be painted on the page, you want to try and do that first. So the cool thing here is Scully is going to give you a lot of performance boosts right out the gates by statically rendering this content. And then what you can do as a developer is you can start to look through these different metrics and figure out what you need to do to fine tune, whether that means caching an API call, whether that means kind of figuring out your biggest areas and what you need to do load order wise or anything like that. So, this is giving you a good performance boost out the gate, and then you can continue to optimize. So those were kind of like three super quick goals of how we can use Scully very quickly. And one of the other things that I want to give you are some tips and tricks. Scully is still fairly new in the ecosystem, which means the team is working really hard and trying to make sure docs are up to date and things like that. But that's not always feasible, especially if you're doing, consulting as your full-time job and contributing to open source. So I would definitely recommend that you clone the Scully repo so you can, search through it locally. I'm a lot more fluent in my IDE than I am necessarily trolling through a GitHub repo. So I feel like this just helps optimize my performance if I can quickly troll through. There are features that are there and they're awesome and they just don't exist in documentation yet that you might miss out on. And so that's why I think this is a good approach. It's also good to be aware that you can take advantage of things like incremental rendering. So I mentioned earlier, I had 391 different villager pages to render, and that can take a long time, especially if I'm like troubleshooting or figuring out how Scully works. I don't want to be waiting on that every time. So you can do incremental rendering where you pass in a base filter, which is going to take, a base route path and only render what you pass it instead of doing everything. So that's available for you. It's important to understand how Scully is rendering. I work as a consultant, and so I've had clients approach me in the past where like, hey, we have performance issues. We've heard about this Scully thing. We can't get it to work. We don't know why. It's just silently failing. And so a lot of times I'll end up, kind of explaining to the clients, well, this is how it works. Is Scully is going to, again, use Puppeteer to crawl your dist directory of your project, try and render all those pages, basically scrape that content and then slap it in a folder and then, other magic stuff that the team has provided for us. But at the base level, that's what it's doing. So I feel like having a good conceptual understanding of that helps you in your debugging journey if you need to figure things out. I think it's also really helpful. I'm a very visual person to see what Scully sees when running our pages. So if you want to, run Puppeteer where you can see it in the browser, you can run it with this --show browser flag, and you'll actually see Puppeteer doing everything. And you can go and see if there are any, for instance, JavaScript errors that you weren't aware of, maybe something snuck through in your prod build or something like that. You can see exactly what the page is seeing. You can actually run Scully with any Puppeteer arguments. So, if you are familiar with Puppeteer, you've used that as part of your workflow, all of those arguments are available for you to pass to Scully to help you figure out exactly what's going on. For instance, I had a client that was like, they would run Scully and then all that were getting rendered were these like blank white pages. And we were like, what's going on? And they had this weird third-party JavaScript library that they had installed to like prevent the flicker, but essentially that was doing some weird logic where it was showing and hiding. And so it was just hiding the entire page to try and get rid of that flicker, but it was causing a real performance issue. And the only way we were able to diagnose that is by visually seeing it in the browser as Puppeteer was running it and being able to figure out what was going on. And then another thing I want to call out is you can debug any potential issues with your Angular router using the -- show guess error flag. And so one of Scully's dependencies is a library that goes through your application and tries to guess what your routes are based on what it can find. And so I had a client that essentially they had routes in these separate arrays that were named, and then they were using a spread operator to bring them together. Well, that was not able to be interpreted by guess, so the guess library, the guess router library under the hood, and so they weren't able to figure out what was going on. It was just silently failing. And so if there's an issue with your router, this is a way that you can see exactly what's going on and get better errors to diagnose what's going on. So I know that was a lot of content for you, but we do have Q&A coming up. So kind of big picture and summary, Scully rocks. It's awesome for JAMstacking Angular, helping us figure out how to get our applications be more performant, especially for SEO purposes. Scully helps us generate static pages of our application, which we can then serve. We are able to generate pages from dynamic routes using the plugin system, whether that means using something that's already there or writing our own. We can make sure to add SEO content using the meta and title services already provided by Angular. We can take advantage of use Scully transfer state to cache API calls we know won't change a lot. And so we can do some, preemptive logic for the user. And we can take advantage of CLI arguments of any Scully dependency. So anything Scully is using, you can use those arguments of the underlying tools while you're running Scully to give you better diagnosing of errors or debugging or anything you need to do. I've got a lot of links for you here. These slides will be available. But again, the demo app is available, just hosted at animalcrossingfieldguide.web.app. The code is available on my GitHub at acnh-fieldguide. I've got a couple articles that explain how to do these concepts really in depth with a lot of code examples that you can copy and paste from, as well as useful debugging tips. And then the slides are available at teffadeiken.github.io/I-want-to-believe. Thank you so much for having me. Scully is a super fun tool. It's always awesome to be able to showcase, things that are built by our own Angular community people. I'm so excited to continue the conversation about that with you all.
Wow, thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a whole bunch. There's a lot of love in the chat as well for you, so thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions from people in the chat, so we're gonna
awesome.
Put some.
Am I okay to kill screen share? Everybody have the links?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The first question is by Lenny Stockman. How will Scully handle routes that are protected with guards? That's an interesting question, indeed. So how does that work?
I guess this is a bit of a philosophical question, because a lot of times you don't care about statically rendering guarded content because it's normally accessible within the application, versus when we're using Scully to statically render pages, those are pages we care about delivering to the browser really, really quickly. So I haven't done a lot of it, because when I've been on clients, it's they want something. Let's say it's like they're a condo selling service and they want people to get information very quickly about a specific condo. They don't care about anything behind protected content. They care about what's immediately going to be in a Google search result. So I don't have experience doing that exactly because of that reason.
Yep, got it. And I guess the guard can still block it if wanted, even if the static.
Yeah, because I mean the guard will still function once your Angular application is loaded. It's just yeah, from a philosophical standpoint, I'm not sure if you would want to care about pre-rendering guarded content to deliver to the browser.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for that one. We had a second question as well from Rob. How will Scully handle translations? Is it compatible with the built-in Angular I18N?
I guess I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's an open issue on GitHub about this, on how to handle it. And I recently talked to a fellow GD about this, and he was able to get it working. So it should be possible.
Nice.
Super. Awesome. That's great news. Then we have a follow-up question by No Name. Is it possible to combine static and dynamic pages easily with Scully?
I guess like when you say static and dynamic pages, do you mean like dynamic in the way that we have like a page that is defined by a param and needing to know that? Or do you mean like a page we're serving statically versus our typical paid like dynamic page we think about in the SPA sense? Or I don't know, Sam, if you have a different interpretation of that question.
I have the same question.
Okay.
It's not clear to me what's exactly meant with the combined static and dynamic pages. I think the question is more about, can we have statically generated pages next to pages that are not statically generated?
Yeah, we can ask for input for No Name. So if you can explain your question a bit more, No Name, feel free to. Meanwhile, we'll ask questions from our panelists. Maarten, do you have any questions?
Yes, it's almost a little bit in the same ballpark as the question we got here, because, or I did not really get it, maybe, but with the transfer state, with the cached API, since we're creating static web pages, why would we cache that API? Because as I understand correctly, the static pages are being rendered by Scully on the fly once you run the build command, and it's putting into the dist folder. So it's whenever we do a new build, we can actually, I probably will call that API again. Is that the reason why you want to cache it?
So the reason why we would want to cache an API request is for better performance. Yeah. That being said, like a lot of times when I'm talking about whether this makes sense or not for clients, it depends on their approach. If they have like a hyper dynamic API that they think is going to be changing a lot, this is probably not a good approach. That being said, let's say they have a certain set of products and maybe that product, like that list of products changes every 6 months. In that sense, it might be a good idea because then you cache the call. You don't have to reissue that request every time because you have an understanding. And so it's important to have conversations at a business level and have an understanding of what matters to the business, how often content changes, and what matters to the user to decide whether that's an appropriate approach or not.
And is it then so that if you do the transfer state, that on every build of your application, when Scully is run, he will look, did something change, or how should I see this? Because it's more than in an approach that if this website or application is running on a CD that is being deployed on multiple occasions per day, per week, or whatever.
When you run this process, it's going to make that request and update the data.json file.
Okay, all right, I understand. All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
So that's mainly then when you're developing, let's say you're developing and your build takes 200 API requests, you want to cache them so that every time you make a change and run a new build, that you can grab the cache results then.
So I think by default, Scully is checking for whether it's already built or not. So if you're developing your app locally and you're using this, you're going to get that API call requested. You're not going to be hitting the data. That data.json file that's been created by making that API request is only going to be served for your static files that you're built. So yes, you're wrapping this like in your development, but you're still going to get that API request because Scully isn't running in your local development.
Got it.
Does that make sense? Okay,
Absolutely.
I'm not sure that was the most eloquent explanation I've ever given.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, that was one of those cool things when I like discovered that under the hood. I was like, oh, that's so cool. So yeah, spelunking through their source code is fun.
Cool. Maarten, did you have any other questions?
Well, the question of No Name is the exact same question I think I have.
Okay.
It's a good one.
So yeah, No Name says, I meant whether it's possible, for example, to have static routes and dynamic routes within one Angular project and to have it run on the same hosting.
So conceptually, let's say we've built the application that I was just doing, and somebody on the interwebs navigates to villager/1. They are going to initially get that static page that's been rendered and delivered, but we're still loading the Angular application on it. That means the second they click in and do something else in the navigation, we are just back to a normal Angular application. Does that
I got it.
help?
Yeah.
So it actually means if it's available statically, it will be delivered statically. But if it's not, then all the other things of Angular. So it's like you get an Angular application with the cool things of being able to serving static content if it's there or if it's generated by Scully. All right. Okay. Very cool.
Yes. And no name answers great. Yeah. Perfect. So easy indeed. Thanks for asking the question. No name. Bonnie, do you have any questions?
No, I actually learned a lot of Scully hanging out with Saunders, so I've been following. I just want to point out, because I think it's funny, that if you look right now when there's no comment underneath us, you see Jan Nicholas like peeking in between Sam and Jurgen, and it's adorable. Like he's here with us, even if he's not.
You want to come say hi?
You really should.
Yeah. Can we have Jan Nicholas come say hi? For audience.
At least in the corner that everybody's asking for him now. There you
Hey, welcome live, Jan Nicholas.
Jan Nicholas, can you see that little picture of you in between Jurgen and Sam? Can you just recreate that moment just for a second for us?
Oh, now it's gone.
Oh wait, no, it moved because there's text popped up now. Oh,
yeah.
You need to make that face.
That's kind of difficult. This was very spontaneous. Not that easy. I feel a lot of pressure on my
Such
side
a
right
diva.
now.
Such a diva.
Oh, wow. Indeed.
It's good to see you, Jan.
Thanks for joining us, Jan and Nicholas. Indeed. Bonnie, any questions for Jennifer?
No, that was great.
No? All right. Yeah. And then Yannick, do you have any questions for Jennifer?
No, it was a great talk.
No. All right. Thank you. Sam, do you have any questions for Jennifer?
Currently not. Maybe after my talk. I'm a little bit. I hope I will deliver some new content, because Jennifer has been talking about the things that I was going to talk about, but I think I can put some extra details and bring some.
We believe in you, Sam.
Yeah, I will say I've sent my clients a lot of your blog posts when I'm like trying to teach them and educate them. So yeah, Sam's super knowledgeable and has some great stuff out there.
Ah, that's brilliant. So much love in here. Yeah, and we learned about ITN as well as Sam, so that's at least something we didn't know about Scully yet. I do have some questions for you, Jennifer, before we go on. So first one, what is the difference between Scully and Universal? I think some people in our audience may be wondering about that.
Right. So the two big ones are slightly different approaches. So Angular Universal provides server-side rendering versus Scully provides static rendering that essentially you could just dump on a CDN. So if you're old school web dev and you remember when DevOps was literally chucking something in FileZilla, that's a bit of the mindset that Scully approaches. Is a very, very crude analogy. So that's a big one. And then in my opinion, I think there's an ease of implementation difference that Scully is, you set up a config, it's very route focused. There is some integration that you need to do with your app, but I feel like it's a little less intertwined than what I've seen needs to be done for Universal.
Got it.
But again, this is one that I will defer to Sam on, because I always refer to his article on Universal versus Scully. So
Jurgen, you're already revealing everything that I'm going to talk about.
Okay. You know what? I'll save my questions until after Sam.
Yeah, do we need to private screen your questions?
And
first?
then then we can answer them together. All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate your talk, and the connection held up greatly. So that was perfect. Thank you.
The thing for me with this talk was really that I was not aware that Scully and Angular would still work together, so that you can have a Scully application with Angular on the side. It's not the same like Gatsby, that it's a Gatsby thing, and or 11t or whatever, then you just have static and that's it. But here you get actually, if it's statically available, you will render it statically, and if it's not, you just have Angular on the side as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Awesome. All right. So with that, let's give a huge applause for Jennifer. And let me introduce Sam for you. All right. So as you may already know, so Sam is our very own co-host here at NGBE Live, and he'll be giving a talk today as well. So Sam Vloeberghs has been playing with websites since he was 16. If you can guess how long that's ago, please put it in the chat, and we'll We'll put it on the screen here. He studied computer science at the University of Ghent and has been coding ever since. Sam is a Google developer expert for Angular, co-organizer of Angular Belgium Meetup Group, and co-organizer of NGBE, Belgium's Angular Conference, and also a very dear friend. Sam is an expert in Angular, Universal, and Scully, and builds digital solutions for health professionals and patients at Rosa. Today, Sam is going to highlight 3 things that we may or may not know yet about Scully. It depends on what Jennifer said, I guess, right? So super curious to learn what that may be, Sam. Please give it up for some Vloeberghs.
It doesn't work as well when we're all on mute, but we're clapping for you, Sam.
Yeah, just a sec. I need to prepare.
Yeah, as you, because just a quick look behind the scenes, Sam is also orchestrating the screen, so he's getting applause, getting introduced, and at the same time orchestrating.
He's loading his static website.
We see a UFO.
There he is. All right. Yeah, we see the UFO, Sam. So with that, we'll give the word to you.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna take out my headphones, so if something's off, just contact me on the chat. So, all good? You can hear me? Yes. So this talk is gonna be about UFOs. No, really? No, not really, because it's about the 3 things that you didn't know about Scully yet. Well, I might be mistaken now because Jennifer might have told you already some things about it. So I will see if I can provide some extra details. I will probably limit my talk to around 10 to 15 minutes, so you might end up with some questions, and I will be very happy to answer them after the presentation as long as we have some time left. So first, let's talk about the name of the project. This has been somewhat already revealed, but where did the name Scully come from? Well, the project started already more than a year ago by the company called HeroDevs, and they're a developer consultancy firm from the USA. And of course, they started the project, so they wanted the name of a hero for this project. And then, yeah, of course, Agent Scully, which is the female lead actor of this 90s science fiction series called The X-Files, was quickly embraced as that hero. So Scully was born, and yeah, X-Files, static files, yeah, kind of relates. And these days, of course, if you are trying to find a good name for your project that still has like an unused domain name, finding that unused domain name might be probably the biggest challenge. So who am I? I was already introduced by Jurgen, but my name is Sam, obviously, and I've been a freelance software engineer for my whole professional career. And even before that, during university, I regularly do some side projects, and the most significant one has been the organization of the Belgian Angular Conference, NGBE, and also maintaining the Angular Belgium Meetup Group. So yeah. And this means that I'm very happy to serve you and our community of Angular friends as a GDE for Angular. So what's Scully and what should you know about it? Well, most of it has already been explained very well by our first guest, but let's do a quick recap. Scully is a static site generator for Angular, and it has the potential to become a static site generator for almost any website or web application. So not even using using Angular. They are not really marketing that, but technically, theoretically, that should be possible. So its configuration is very easy, and the documentation is growing, so it's becoming well documented. It allows for automated route discovery of the pages that have to be pre-rendered for your application. So that includes all static routes that get discovered by using guest parser, and all dynamic routes that get discovered by plugin configuration and custom router plugins. So this is all possible because of its plugin system that allows us to hook into the Scully process and do awesome stuff. So how does it work? Again, a quick recap, because of course repetition makes you remember it better. First, we need to build our Angular application, preferably using the production flag for an optimized build. And then as soon As we run Scully, using npm run Scully, the route discovery process will start. This process will generate a full list of the 2 pre-rendered pages and output this as an easy-to-read and understandable JSON file. Next, Scully will fire up a static web server for the static assets of this Angular production build. It might not be the port 4200, so don't care about that detail, but we just need the application to be available from a server during the pre-rendering process. And then Scully will pre-render all the pages it collected before. And that's basically it. It looks pretty simple, right? But there's quite a lot of well-thought magic happening behind the scene. And because of the tool, the existence of the tool, we don't really need to think about that too hard. So that's nice. So you also might have heard about Universal, and in essence, it can do the same. But what's the difference between Scully and Universal? And the short version is that Scully uses Puppeteer to render and serialize our pages to static HTML, and Universal uses the JavaScript DOM, which is a Node.js implementation of our browser's document object model. Let's compare some good and less good points about Scully and Universal. First, the good parts about Scully. Scully allows for an easy configuration and has a very nice extendable plugin system. You can use nearly all JavaScript plugins in your application, not even Angular JavaScript dependencies, nearly every JavaScript plugin that you can find on the internet. Scully will be able to handle them. Scully is loosely coupled from your project, so it's not even integrated in the angular.json file. This means that you can easily integrate and set it up for any existing Angular project. And as already mentioned, it uses a super efficient transfer state to optimize client-side navigations. Universal, the good parts, Universal can be very fast and reliable because it uses a super fast implementation of the DOM on the Node.js level. And you can set it up directly via the Angular CLI and start using the official Angular supported builders. It allows for pre-rendering and server-side rendering of our application. On the contrary, supporting all the goodness of Scully, and because of using Puppeteer, it can be relatively slow when you are generating and pre-rendering many pages. Scully does not really allow for server-side rendering. So it does not really allow for server-side rendering. And so an update to the data that build up your pages will require a new pre-rendering of those pages. Yeah. So the less good parts about Universal is that it does require a tight coupling to your projects. So it's integrated inside the angular.json, and Universal in general requires a high discipline of strict coding principles. For example, you cannot use the window navigator document APIs directly, and you will need to use some dependency injection to work that out. If you want to integrate it in an existing application, it might be hard because, as I said before, it requires strict coding principles. And if you did not start your project from the beginning with those strict coding principles, you might need to do some refactoring when you want to integrate Universal. It also has a transfer state, but it's good for initial page load. It's less efficient for client-side navigations. And let's talk about that a bit. So to optimize the client-side navigation. This is an amazing and performant thing about Scully, and Jennifer already explained it. But what does it mean in detail? So as soon as a static page is loaded, Angular is bootstrapped in the browser. Any navigation that you afterwards do in the app is potentially a client-side navigation. So Angular is again handling the routing. It's a normal single-page application as before. So Scully is capable of collecting all the dynamic data that was loaded via HTTP during the pre-rendering process of any specific page. And this data is saved in a static asset file data.json right near the generated HTML for that page. So this is even more. This can even be more performant than the transfer state service from Angular, because and just in general, because you don't need to cache the complete data that came from the API. If you use some mapping and some filtering on your data, you will only save the data that you need in that data.json file. So when we navigate client-side, that data.json file will get loaded and have all or only the required data for the next route. So there's no more need to query the API or the backend, which could have been even more than one call. So imagine a page where you need to call 3 different endpoints to get the total data of your page. Then you will make one call from you will make one call in the end instead of 3 calls. So do I still need to explain to you that this can be super fast? So instead of getting data from different dynamic API endpoints that might do slow calculations or database reads, we just read from one static file that has all the data that we need. So to give a better idea, I've prepared a visual representation of how this works. So let's first start with how a typical Angular Universal server-side rendering setup would work. So the browser requests a page. In this example, it's a news detail page, and the server responds to that by generating that page on the server and fetching all the required data. So, for example, first the details about the news, and then secondly, all the details about the author of that news article. The browser is waiting for the response of the full HTML, and of course also including the Angular build assets. So as soon as the server returns to the browser gets the full HTML and all the assets, and Angular bootstraps again in the browser. So now we're back at a single page application. So as soon as the user starts navigating around, so for example, he goes to another detailed page for a news article, Angular will kick in, and Angular will first say, okay, I need to get the news detail, and then I will need to get the author detail. So now we're doing 2 dynamic data requests, which we could have avoided. With Scully, things, of course, work differently. So again, the browser requests a page to the static server. This page was already generated up front, so it can instantly return, and there's no need to fetch the data from any API at runtime. The browser receives the full HTML, the Angular build assets, and everything related to the Angular application, and the browser bootstraps the single page application. So now, as soon as the user navigates around, for example, again, the second news detail page, Angular fetches that data, but Scully intercepts this request and fetches the aggregated data from a static data.json file. And now I come with something extra that Jennifer has not told us yet, is that you can use something called inline state. And so instead of generating an extra data.json file, that data will be included in the index.html for that page. So you can even have one file less in your pre-rendering process. So you have 2 options, or you use the data.json, or you use the index.html of the other page. So in general, this is much faster because your application does not need to query a live API. It can retrieve the data for the next page from a simple JSON file that got generated during the pre-rendering. And that file is also hosted on the static server. So already mentioned this before. If you only use part of the data returned by the API, we can choose to only cache that specific part in the data.json file. Another thing to mention is that, of course, you can also do pre-rendering with Universal, and we can come to a same solution where we have that data.json file or the data included in index.html file, but this does not come out of the box with Universal. You will need to do some manual coding for that. The third thing, something that luckily for me, Jennifer did not talk about yet, is being able to control the stability of the application. So this is the last thing I will tell you about today. So what do I mean with stability? To put it simple, we can reach stability in our application if there are no more tasks pending. In the context of pre-rendering pages, pending tasks could, for example, be an ongoing HTTP call or a pending set timeout, for example. And these tasks need to complete to have our full data and content ready. So if we do not wait for those tasks to end, we might end up with an incomplete page, for example, missing the dynamic data from our backend. And by default, stability in Angular is handled by Zone.js, and the isStable observable that is exposed on the application ref service of our Angular framework. So whenever we are using the built-in HTTP client from Angular, Universal uses this observable to know that the page is ready to be serialized. But Angular is by default not aware of any async operation, like, for example, HTTP calls that are running outside of the framework. So this is about being able to use any third-party library in our application with Scully, and it will still work. You might use any other tool to do HTTP requests to your backend. A good example for that could be, for example, a headless CMS JavaScript API that you use, for example, Amplify or Netlify or whatever. And that headless CMS JavaScript API does not have an integration with Angular yet. So it's running outside of the context of Zone.js. So in this case, Scully or Angular Universal will not exactly know when the page is stable. So it does not know when to correctly serialize our page to static HTML. And for this, we can configure our Scully module to disable the always monitoring and to wait for a manual idle. So as soon as the Angular app has received the content, we manually fire the app ready event as a side effect of the data fetching. So this is what we do in the tab function, that assuming that, of course, our external HTTP library exposes an RxJS API. But in most cases, it will be a promise-based API, but in Angular, you can easily wrap around that with RxJS. So those were the three things I wanted to mention. As I said before, most of them were already discussed, but I hope that I was able to add some extra detail. And if you want to read more about Scully, you can of course check the official documentation on the Scully website and their GitHub organization. And I also wrote a few articles about most of the stuff that I explained in this talk. It's written out on my blog. For example, custom plugins for Scully, how to disable Angular with Scully. That might be very interesting for you if you want to get to that 99 or 100% in Lighthouse. More in detail, the difference between Scully and Universal, and comparing some benchmarks with pre-rendering static pages with Scully and Universal. So thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to contact me about this at my email or on Twitter. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. Let's have a look at the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to let them or to post them in the chat. I'm going to add everyone back here to the screen. All right. Awesome. Yeah. Kudos.
I didn't even know I didn't know.
So what did you not know, Bonnie?
Just I thought that that it was pretty cool. The third one, just the stability of it. I thought it was already cool, and I learned some new stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And No Name also asked, like, so it's possible for React and Vue to also use Scully, so that indeed, like, is it possible to run Scully with other JavaScript frameworks than Angular?
Yeah. Theoretically, yes. I mentioned this with the manual idle thing. Yeah? So if you fire an event that says to Scully that the application is ready to serialize, then Puppeteer will just take the current state of the DOM and render it, serialize it to static HTML.
And did I see guest parser maybe also supports React, or am I imagining that? I feel like I was trolling that repo recently.
That could be, I don't know that, but yeah, potentially.
Yep. And
So
Boaz
did
also-
nobody guess how long ago I was 16 years old?
Yeah, we actually asked the question, and Bram Pers answered, like, was that 16 years ago? So that would be...
Yep.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yep.
So, oh, wait, Bram, we will have to send you a prize, eh? So thank you for guessing, and you were totally right. It's indeed 16 years ago. How
I
cool
just
is
realized that now that I've been programming and coding for half of my life. It's insane.
that? So we learned 4 things today. Brilliant. While we wait for some other questions in the chat coming up, Bonnie, do you have any questions for Sam?
No, I don't think so. I think you look great, Sam. So you should give us some tips on skincare.
Perhaps not drinking for a month and a half is helping.
There you go.
And Maarten, do you have any questions for Sam? And or Jennifer?
Well, since the talks were a little bit in the same ballpark, the only thing that it became very clear, and I was really not aware of, is that indeed Scully just runs aside Angular, and for me it was always like I'm not going to dive into that because I don't know if I just only need Scully, but now it's becoming clear that it's like, yes, you get statically generated pages, but you get everything that Angular already has to offer. So if you have like a news website where you have like users and account info and all those things, that can still be your Angular application, but the statically generated news feed, that is just Scully then. And that's something that I did not know before, even though I proofread some of Sam's early blog posts. So yeah, but and yeah, I also never dabbled with Universal before, stuff like that. But I have been investigating stuff like 11t and things like that. But yeah, then this would be like an easier go-to because I'm more familiar with Angular, and then moving away from that because 11t is like really static. So once it's built, it's done, and you cannot do anything, even though you always need to rebuild. So yeah, that's a little bit different. So if you want to have both, go with Scully.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. Yannick,
There's
do you
a-
have any questions? Oh, sorry, Sam. Did you want to go?
There is a question in the chat. Well, it's not really a question. It's more of a remark that the latest Angular update has something similar. Well, Universal has already been in Angular since V2. So I think in the recent edition, in the recent version of Angular, there's the option to cache data that was statically generated during server-side rendering and return that if it's already cached, if it's already rendered before. So you will not always re-render each page again. It will return a cache if it was already rendered before.
Okay, thank you for asking that question, Bohak. Much appreciated.
isn't it also that you will always have both? Like in the sense that if you have certain server-side rendering, there will always be some trade-offs instead of having like Scully with it's actually giving you the static content and it's super fast as well because if you just hit the endpoint and it's there.
Yeah.
But is there some timeline where they both, or is the team of Scully like looking to Angular Universal as well? Like we can learn from both of each other and maybe we can come up with some hybrid or built-in solution in Angular as well? Is it then on like maybe a far ahead future? But I would think that a lot of Angular developers would also be able to benefit of just having that static generators or static content generator being built in Angular, like out of the box.
Well, I think current conversations have more led towards the Angular team making it easier for Angular developers to consume the tool sets they want versus trying to maintain or do everything or solve every problem. So I think right now the current roadmap is more towards how do we let people pick and choose their solutions versus providing the guardrails that a lot of us Angular developers are so fond of.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think I heard, I'm not sure if I should talk too much about it, but I think that the Scully team is looking into incorporating some techniques of Universal into how they pre-render. So why would they not do it? Because if you can use a virtual implementation of the GSDOM versus a real browser, which is much faster, then you can optimize your pre-rendering process. So this is also the idea behind Scully. Scully will work for any library that you include in your application. If a library sets a timeout, or if it's calling the window dot whatever, location dot whatever, session, cookie API, whatever, it will still work. And if you do that with Universal, it will not, because it's running on a Node.js context. So that's for me the big value of Scully, is that it works for everything. Hi, Sam.
Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's actually like the NX.
You do it again.
NX toolbox for static generation of your content. Like you have normal NX, and you can use it for Angular, for React, for whatever you want. But here with Scully, at some point in time, you can use it for React, for Vue, for whatever, as I understand.
That was theoretical, and Martin, that I said that.
But it's giving them an opportunity to expand, take over the world.
It was on video, Sam. You've committed.
Well, I think part of it is playing catch up too, because if there's one thing people have been giving Angular shit for, it's it's not as performant. And so Scully gives us a super way to clap back and be like, boom, look at that static rendering. Oh, and we still have all the things we like coming into the background.
Absolutely. I think we can all agree that it's a wonderful tool based on what we learned today. So very, very cool to have it in our community right now. Yannick, do you have any questions for Sam and or Jennifer?
Nope.
No? All right. Martin, is it your birthday today? Or did we misread that in the chat? That's a long yes or no? Is it? Yes. Oh, well, happy birthday,
happy
Martin.
birthday.
Wow, happy birthday.
I actually was assuming they're doing it. Why are they planning a session on my birthday? But yeah, it's just a date as one other. But yeah, Sam is still very young. I'm a bit older. So, sadly, I have been coding for way longer.
But happy birthday. We send you lots of love, Martin, and thank you for
very
joining
much.
on your
Thank you very
birthday. Yeah. I do have one final question, Sam and Jennifer. Sam, you mentioned like Scully intercepts the API request and serves it from the data JSON. Does that mean like Scully lives at runtime in the browser, or does it kind of reroute that when pre-rendering? Are you aware of how it works?
Sam, you want to take
Jennifer, if
it
you
or
want.
you want me to?
Yeah, you can go. You can
Okay.
take a shot.
So this data.json file is only going to be created if you use the static service method, right? And that's going to say, okay, you're passing it a key and you're passing it a value, which in the purposes we've been talking about is an HTTP request. So at that point, when you're running Scully, it's going to make that API request, create that data.json file, and store it to be served. So it's something that you actively have to do to make that happen, to be available there. The other thing Scully is doing is it's, God, I can't remember. They've got a method that's just, I think, is Scully running? I can't remember the exact method name without trolling. Yeah. That they have that will not run for your local development version, but will be initial, like it's going to be true in your static version. And so if it's true, then that static service is going to serve that data.json file versus your local development, your API request will happen as normal. Did I explain?
Yeah.
You think I covered it, Sam?
So the original question from Jurgen was, is Scully running in the runtime? And that's partly true, partly because you're injecting a service from an Angular service from Scully. So it's not like Puppeteer is running at runtime. It's more just Scully Angular code that's running.
Got it. So some of the pieces of Scully are also present in the browser then at runtime.
Yeah, you do the Scully lib module.4 root. So obviously that code will get included in the idle monitor service, for example, the transfer state service. That's Scully code that will be inside your bundle.
Got it. Okay, thank you for explaining. So that's why it's like, yeah, technically it's possible to do React, but then stuff like this would not be possible because it's like an Angular module that has to be loaded to do stuff like this at runtime. Yeah. Got it. Super
I don't think
nice.
it would be much work to port the code from the Scully Angular part to React, but I'm not aware of anybody already done it. So theoretically, it should be fairly easy to do.
I think with Webpack 5 and Module Federation and all those cool things, it might maybe be something that is possible. Let's ask Manfred.
Yeah, I was here last time, so we learned a lot about Module Federation. If you want to learn,
might be a challenge for him
to episode 3, yeah, indeed, and rewatch that. So, but yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer and Sam, for being with us today. It was so great. We learned a lot along the way. Super nice. I think we now all finally understand what Scully is and what the difference is with Universal. Also, a huge shout out to the top contributors of Scully, which is Sander Elias and Jorge Cano. Thank you for bringing so much awesomeness to our community, for making this happen. If any of you, Sander or Jorge, if you're open to joining us one episode, feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to have you here and go a bit more in depth on some of these intricacies that we learned about today. Before we jump off, Sam, Jennifer, where can we learn more about you? And is there any advice you would like to give to our Angular community or to our audience? Maybe Jennifer, you want to go first?
You can follow me on Twitter at OMG@Sveti. I do have a website, jenniferwadella.com, where I post blogs. Actually, it is in Gatsby right now, so I'm in the process of transferring it to Scully in my spare time. No spare time. And my advice in general for this conversation we've had about Scully is this is an awesome tool. But I think it's really important to understand the realities of the business, your product, what you're needing to improve, and understand that this performance in the SEO game, there's not one silver bullet. You need to look at this very holistically, understand what your problems are, understand where you're falling short when it comes to performance scores that Google cares about. So definitely take advantage of Scully if the situation makes sense, but make sure that you're understanding things from a business perspective and making the right technical decisions in light of that.
Was that Jan jumping in the pool just then?
No, we're at an Airbnb, and there are people who are not working like us nerds. We haven't even gone to the beach yet, and we've been here since we got in Saturday night.
All right, don't turn the screen or we'll be in GDPR trouble. Sam, is there anything where can we learn more about you, and anything you want to recommend to our audience?
Yeah. Well, I've been doing some consulting on Universal and Scully, and it can still be problematic. For example, when you need to generate, let's say, 50,000 pages or even more, how do you do that? There are still challenges. How do you distribute 50,000 pages to a CDN? How long does that take? How many servers do you need? It's the questions that arise around the problem are insanely difficult to resolve. So having such a tool like Scully or Universal is just the beginning. When you really want to provide business value for a very big news website that has like 50,000 or more pages, then yeah, it's more about how to generate your static pages. So just keep that in mind. It's in the global problem of this is it's insane. It's hard to grasp.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, and we learned it that it's like the kickstart for your SEO journey, but there's still more work to be done once you have it running. So thank you so much both for sharing your insights with us today. We learned a lot, and thanks for everyone for joining in the audience. We hope you had a great time as well, learned something new as well. Please have an awesome day, stay safe, and see you in our next episode. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.